Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Siddiqui, the father of holophase. We began by placing pattern before object. Phi gave us primitive circular comparability, and from the beginning we learned that only relations are public. From there, we disciplined claims. Every claim must declare its type, scope, assumptions, and window of access. We learned how to read difference, how local change appears through lifts and the carrier, and how patterns carry finite local signatures through jets. We learned that every pattern can be read through three phases: cadence, texture, and flow, and that pattern language has limits. Domains matter, excisions matter, aliasing matters, and boundaries are part of identity rather than mere edges. We then learned how local descriptions are stitched into global structure, how winding and holonomy reveal memory, and how defects remain as stable topological features. Identity became invariant equivalence under declared lawful transformations. Canonicalization helped comparison but did not create sameness. Deep understanding meant finding the invariant generating core. Persistence became certified survival of identity through change. Null became the discipline verdict when no pattern can be honestly certified. Finally, we learned that some patterns care about direction. Orientation, chirality, and reversal can matter. That forced us to install reversal bookkeeping through C, P, T, and their combined audit. Now a new question opens naturally. Once patterns are disciplined individually, and once we know how direction and reversal affect them, how do patterns relate to one another at all? Phi Pattern Science, the complete foundation. Part 23, Interaction as joint Phi pattern constraint, not primitive force. A beautiful story about how patterns relate, why force is not primitive at the pattern layer, and what it really means for two patterns to be coupled. There comes a point in every serious journey of understanding when a familiar word must be questioned. In this part, that word is force. Force is one of the most ordinary words in the world. We grow up with it. A hand pushes a door. A magnet pulls a pin. Wind pushes a branch. One billiard ball hits another. A person influences a friend. A market shock affects another market. The word feels natural. It feels almost too obvious to examine. That is exactly why it must be examined, because familiar words can hide old habits of thought. And the old habit hidden inside the word force is this: that first, there are fully finished, fully separate things, and then later, some mysterious extra ingredient reaches between them and makes them affect one another. Phi pattern science asks us not to begin there. At the pattern layer, we do not begin with primitive objects plus a second primitive called force. We begin with certifiable structure: relations, invariants, boundaries, transformations, persistence, topology, orientation, and declared windows of legibility. So when we reach the question of interaction, we must ask it in that same disciplined language. What if interaction is not a mysterious extra thing between pre-existing objects? What if interaction is better understood as joint constraint? That is the heart of this chapter. The claim of this part is simple to say and deep to understand. Interaction is lawful co-structure between patterns that cannot be fully certified as independent. This means interaction is not a substance, it is not a secret fluid, it is not a magical agency floating between things. It is a pattern of relation. It is the lawful fact that two or more patterns enter a joint structure such that their full public story cannot be honestly told in separation. In simpler language, if you cannot fully describe one without referring to the other, interaction is present. This is a very different picture from the old story of primitive force. But once you see it, It begins to clarify examples everywhere. Imagine two people carrying a table through a narrow doorway. You could say one person helps the other. You could say each exerts force. That is fine at the practical level. But what is really happening? Their movement is jointly constrained by the table, the doorway, the angle of the turn, and each other's grip. One cannot move freely without affecting the other. Their actions are coupled. The event is not two separate stories with a mysterious extra between them. It is one patterned relation. Or imagine two gears whose teeth interlock. Turn one and the other turns. What is the interaction? Not an invisible spirit between the gears. The teeth, shape, and fit define a lawful coupling. The interaction is in the structure. This is how Part 23 wants us to think. Reframing interaction. Most traditional science and most ordinary life tells interaction as a story of one thing acting on another. Object A pushes object B. Field A acts on particle B. Body A attracts body B. The picture is intuitive and often useful, but as a foundational starting point, it can mislead. It can make us imagine that the world is made of isolated little islands, each complete in itself, and that relation arrives afterward as a kind of added bridge. Pattern science reverses that order of explanation. At the pattern layer, relation is not an afterthought. It is part of what is publicly real. So instead of saying, what force passed from A to B, we first ask, what lawful structure makes their descriptions inseparable? This does not mean later sciences cannot use force-like language. They can, and often with great success. Engineers can speak of load and torque. Physicists can speak of force laws. Social scientists can speak of influence. But at the foundational layer, those are readouts, not primitives. They are useful summaries of lawful coupling, not ontic ingredients added from nowhere. So the reframing is this. Interaction is joint constraint, lawful coupling between pattern structures that cannot be fully separated. That sentence carries the entire part. Interaction is joint because the description belongs to more than one pattern. It is constrained because lawful possibilities are restricted by relation. It is coupling because changes in one pattern cannot be tracked honestly without reference to the other. It is not primitive force because no extra metaphysical substance needs to be added. This is not a denial of later scientific vocabulary. It is a cleaning of the foundation beneath that vocabulary. What interaction means in pattern terms. Now we can say more exactly what interaction means in the language of Phi Pattern science. Patterns interact when their certification cannot be completed independently. That is the simplest core criterion. If pattern A can be fully described, transformed, and certified without essential reference to pattern B, and pattern B can be fully described the same way without A, then at that level, no interaction has yet been established. Proximity is not enough. Simultaneity is not enough. Mere coexistence is not enough. Interaction begins when separability fails. This can happen in several ways. Patterns may share invariants. Some stable quantities or constraints may belong properly to the pair or whole rather than to either member alone. Two children on a seesaw are a simple example. The balance condition is not a property of only one child. It belongs to the joint system. Patterns may be coupled through boundaries. A cell membrane, a shoreline, a wall between rooms, a national border, or a circuit interface can all mediate interaction. The boundary is not merely where one thing stops. It is often where regulated relation begins. Patterns may co-constrain each other's transformations. The lawful changes open to one may depend on the state of the other. A key cannot turn freely without the lock. A dancer's next motion depends on the partner's motion. Patterns may be topologically linked. Two rings can be interlocked. Braided strands can constrain one another globally. A network can couple distant regions through connectivity rather than contact. Patterns may also fail in dependent factorization. Repeated attempts to tell separate stories leave residue that only a joint description can absorb. All of these are forms of interaction. So interaction means lawful co-constraint. It means the patterns do not admit full public certification as isolated descriptions at the relevant level. Non-separability, the key criterion. The deepest single idea of this chapter is non-separability. Ordinary intuition often assumes separability first. It imagines that things are naturally independent unless something special connects them. Pattern science rejects that assumption as foundational laziness. Separability is not a right granted in advance, it must be demonstrated. That is one of the major lessons of part 23. So here is the key criterion. Two patterns are interacting if describing one fully requires reference to the other. This is non-separability. A simple example is a married couple moving house. Each person remains distinct, but many actions become jointly constrained by boxes, timing, shared budget, vehicle space, and destination. Their stories in that domain are not fully separable. A more mechanical example is two interlocking gears. You can name each gear separately, but once coupled, neither rotation is fully intelligible without the other. The gear ratio is a joint property. At a deeper physical level, quantum entanglement is a famous modern example. But the core idea can be understood without technical detail. The pair carries a joint structure that cannot be reduced to two independent stories. Non-separability does not mean total merger. Distinctness can remain. It means only that distinctness no longer guarantees independent certification. That is interaction. Everyday examples across scales. To feel the idea deeply, it helps to see it across many scales. Think of two pendulums hanging from the same flexible support. One swings, the support shifts, and the other begins to respond. The coupling does not require a mysterious hand moving between them. The shared support is enough. The structure couples them. Think of an ecosystem. A species cannot be fully understood without prey, predators, nutrients, climate, and habitat. The species is not an isolated story. It lives in a web of constraints. Think of a classroom. A teacher shapes the students, but students also shape the pace, tone, and clarity of the teaching. The lesson is not one-way force. It is co-produced relation. Think of a violin and a bow. The music does not belong to the violin alone or the bow alone. The sound comes from their lawful interaction. Think of Earth and Moon. At a later scientific level, we may speak of gravity, but at the pattern layer, what matters is a coupled geometry with shared constraints. Tides, orbits, and rotational effects belong to the joint structure. Think of two close friends. The mood of one affects the other, yes, but more deeply, habits, timing, language, trust, and memory become mutually conditioning. Their lives carry shared pattern. Across all these cases, what matters is not a primitive force substance, but lawful co-structure. Evidence for interaction. How do we know interaction is present? This chapter installs several evidence forms. The first is local overlap effects. If two patterns share a region such that what happens there cannot be assigned cleanly to one alone, interaction is likely present. Wet paint blending at an edge is a simple example. The second is boundary mediated coupling. Many interactions occur not through total overlap, but through surfaces, membranes, borders, contact points, or interfaces. Heat through a wall, nutrients through a membrane, goods through a port, sound through a door. These are all boundary couplings. The third is topological linkage. Two patterns may be coupled because of global connection rather than local contact. Interlocked rings, braided fibers, network pathways, and defect pairings all illustrate this. The fourth is shared transformation constraints. If the lawful changes available to one pattern depend on the state of another, interaction is present. A lock constrains a key. Soil constrains a seed. A traffic system constrains each driver's options. The fifth is joint invariance. Some stable quantities belong only to the combined system. Household debt belongs to the household, not to one spouse alone. Seesaw balance belongs to the pair, not to one child alone. The sixth is failure of independent factorization. If attempts to model the patterns separately leave systematic residue, then coupling is probably real. These are evidences of interaction. None require mythic force. All require declared structure. Why force is not primitive here? Now we can state the principle bluntly. At the pattern layer, there is no mysterious force substance. There is only lawful co-structure. This means we do not import force as a primitive explanation. We do not say things interact because force exists and stop there. That would simply rename our ignorance. Instead, we ask, what boundary, invariant, transformation dependence, topological link, or non-separability makes the interaction lawful? This also protects the framework from action at a distance mysticism. If a distant relation exists, it still needs declared structure. It may run through geometry, topology, field-like organization, boundary networks, or other lawful coupling, but it cannot be left as mere mystery. Einstein's reframing of gravity is a useful analogy here. Gravity ceased to be treated as a mysterious pull and became intelligible through geometry. Part 23 performs a similar move at the pattern layer in general. Interaction is not magic inference, it is structure. 7. Interaction and independence. One of the biggest conceptual shifts in this part is that independence is not default. Most people assume the opposite. They assume things are separate unless proven connected. Pattern science refuses that assumption. Independence must be certified. This matters because whether patterns are separable often depends on scope, level, and purpose. A brick may be treated independently for one question and only as part of a wall for another. A cell organelle may be studied on its own in one window and only as part of a living cell in another. A person may look independent in one narrow description and relationally inseparable in a wider one. So part 23 installs a new discipline. Do not assume separability. Test it. Can each pattern be certified with no essential reference to the other? Can their transformations be described independently? Do they share invariants? Do boundaries couple them? Does topology link them? Does residue remain when factorization is attempted? If those tests expose structural dependence, then interaction is present. The rigor layer, gates. This chapter installs several gates. The separability gate asks whether the patterns can genuinely be factored into independent certifications at the relevant scope. The coupling gate asks what lawful relation connects them: overlap, interface, topology, shared transformation dependence, joint invariant, or something else declared. The boundary gate asks whether interaction is mediated by edges, membranes, surfaces, borders, or interfaces, and whether those have been declared rather than hidden. The topology gate asks whether global linkage, winding, braiding, or defect relation matters. The joint invariant asks what invariants belong to the pair or whole rather than to isolated members alone. These gates ensure that interaction claims do not remain vague. They turn ordinary talk of influence into public certification. Firewalls against smuggling. Because interaction language is so familiar, it is also one of the easiest places for hidden assumptions to creep in. So part 23 installs firewalls. No importing primitive force metaphysics. No treating action at a distance as a free explanation. No assuming separability without certification. No hiding boundary coupling. No confusing mere proximity with interaction. No interaction claim without coupling evidence. No silent common cause smuggling. That last one matters. Two patterns may vary together because of a third undeclared background pattern rather than because of strong direct interaction. Two sunflowers turn together because of the sun. Two clocks strike together because someone set them both. Correlation alone is not enough. These firewalls keep interaction talk honest. A simple equation-like picture. Sometimes a compact symbolic picture helps. Suppose two patterns are A and B. If they are fully independent at the relevant level, we may treat the joint description as factorable. Joint pattern equals A plus B. This does not mean simple arithmetic. It means their stories can be placed side by side without needing extra relational structure. But if interaction is present, that factorization fails. We need joint pattern equals A, B under coupling, or more compactly, J equals A, B, C, where J is the joint pattern and C here means coupling structure. The whole cannot be honestly certified as A alone plus B alone. The relation belongs inside the description. Likewise, if the transformations open to A depend on B, we may write that the lawful changes of A are conditional on B. In plain language, what A can become depends on the state of B. These symbolic summaries are not there to intimidate. They are there to compress the story. Why this matters beyond physics. This chapter is not only about physical science. Interaction as joint constraint also clarifies life. A parent is not fully intelligible as parent without child. A teacher is not fully intelligible as teacher without students. A lover is not fully intelligible as lover without beloved. A citizen is not fully intelligible as citizen without institutions. A species is not fully intelligible as species without ecology. This does not erase distinctness. It shows that identity often lives inside relation. We are not little sealed islands occasionally touched by external force. Much of life is built from lawful co-constraint. This is one of the most profound implications of Part 23. Reality is not fundamentally a box of beads. It is a woven field of relations, some loose, some tight, some local, some global, some temporary, some persistent. Interaction is one of the names we give to those places where relation becomes structurally unavoidable. 12. Refusal conditions. A serious framework must also say when a claim should be refused. An interaction claim should be refused if the coupling type is not declared. It should be refused if separability is merely assumed rather than tested. It should be refused if no joint invariants are specified where relevant. It should be refused if primitive force language replaces declared structure. It should be refused if the patterns remain fully independently factorable at the stated scope. It should be refused if mere proximity or correlation is presented as sufficient evidence. These refusals are not pedantry. They are protection against vague explanation. What this chapter installs. By the end of part 23, several things have been achieved. Interaction has been reframed as joint constraint rather than primitive force. The concept of non-separability has been installed as the key criterion. Boundary-mediated coupling, topology, shared invariance, and transformation dependence have become recognized evidence forms. A distinct interaction claim type has been established. Gates and firewalls now protect the framework against force smuggling and undeclared coupling. This prepares the way for the next step, because once patterns interact, the natural next question is, under what conditions do they compose? When do interacting patterns form a larger certifiable whole? And when composition fails, what does that failure reveal? That is the handoff to part 24. Imagine a great woven carpet. Each thread can be named separately. Each has its color, direction, and local place. But the carpet is not just a heap of independent threads plus some extra ghost called interaction. The carpet exists because threads cross, tighten, constrain, and hold one another. Pull one region and another responds. Some relations are local, some are global. Some knots matter only nearby, others determine the structure of the whole design. Where is the interaction? It is in the weave. That is part 23 in one image. Interaction is not a mysterious substance added to isolated things. It is the lawful fact that patterns can enter joint constraint such that their full public story cannot be honestly told in separation. Always, peace be upon you.